Welcome to another lecture involving web principles and user experience. I'm your professor, Dr. Lisa English Dowdell. So in this lecture, you're going to learn to assess websites based on aesthetics, usability, and functionality using heuristic evaluation methods to determine its effectiveness. The learning objectives for this particular lecture are to learn how to conduct a heuristic evaluation of websites, identify strengths and weaknesses in web design and user experience, and to propose actionable recommendations for improvement. Heuristics can be thought of as a rule of thumb. A heuristic evaluation or expert review of a website or a mobile site is based on a set of predetermined heuristics or qualitative guidelines. Now, heuristic evaluation is different from usability testing. Usability testing leverages users of a product or people representing the intended target audience to understand and identify areas of pain points or errors that might prevent completion of, say, specific task or lead to dissatisfaction in a target group. But with a heuristic evaluation, you're evaluating with 1 to 3 experts who don't need to be users of the product and used when, say, you can't access actual experts of the product. Now, this approach is a less formal method that can be executed by your internal team and involve navigating the product along the journey map you expect, say your users to experience, making note along the way and using a set of heuristics to help guide you. So unlike user testing, where the site or say the prototype is evaluated by users in a heuristic evaluation, the site is evaluated by usability experts. That's why you'll sometimes find it referred to as an expert review. How do we conduct an effective heuristic evaluation? Well, one, the first step is to define the scope of the evaluation. The first thing you should do is define the scope. Okay, basically think about, if you need to test every aspect of your product or should you concentrate on particular user flows. Think about the specific usability parameter that you want to test, such as maybe the registration portion, the log in and log out portion, email sign up, navigation, so on and so forth. Having a limited scope is easier to control and assess. These will be, say, your use cases, and the use cases should be real scenarios in which the product is currently going to be used. Step two is to know your users and have clear definition of the target audience's goals, their contacts, so on. User personas can kind of help evaluators to see things from the user's perspective. This is an important part of mapping out the user flow, as different user groups have like distinct expectations and user behaviors. For instance, some users might not have issues registering for a product, while others may see it an unnecessary step and then say abandon the product. The step three is to select which heuristics the evaluators are going to use. This will ensure that they are all using, say, the same guidelines throughout the evaluation. Today we're going to be defining one of the most popular ones used in UX heuristic evaluations. Step four is to decide how the evaluators will evaluate and report the usability of the product. Now, this could be a simple evaluation system using like a severity rating, like, critical issue, normal issue, minor issue, good practice, or, a traffic light scheme like red, orange, yellow, green. Evaluators should kind of keep track of issues by making detailed notes of where they encounter the issues and how serious it is. And this is going to help organize the design team's backlog later on. The fifth step is where this is going to be the part where you're going to gather and then compare and then summarize the findings. You're going to collate the results for your analysis and then suggest different fixes. So let's examine like how one of the most popular used UX heuristics would work to assess interfaces in, say, a human computer interaction. So in 1990, web usability pioneers Jacob Nielsen and Rolf Molich published a set of principles or heuristics, which industry specialists began to adopt to assess interfaces in human computer interaction. Now, these heuristics create a sort of checklist or criteria, to find like flaws which design teams might have overlooked. Now, the Nielsen-Molich heuristic states that a system should, one, have visibility of system status. That means users should always be informed of what the system or the project is doing in a reasonable timeline. The next one is to match between system and the real world. So that means avoid technical jargon. The product interface should align to terminology and language familiar to the user. The third one is user control and freedom. Now, we know mistakes can happen, so you want to provide a way out when they do. So supporting things like undo, redo is one way of achieving this, along with methods of, say, canceling an operation. Then there's consistency and standards. So we don't want to reinvent the wheel. Users understand conventions and patterns and should not have to guess as to what something means. We want to follow the patterns that exist across different platforms. Then there's error prevention. So providing feedback, say when an error does occur, is going to be important. But better yet, if you can help prevent an error from occurring in the first place, then that's going to be even better. So providing like smart defaults and confirmation is going to be beneficial to this. Then there's recognition rather than recall. So to maximize usability, we want to reduce the load on memory and recall. So we want to avoid hiding important actions behind menus and instead present options in a more visible way so that users don't have to remember like where they are. Then there's flexibility and efficiency in use. So we want to accommodate both the novice and the advanced user, but tailor the experience. So we provide ways of, say, speeding up workflows and accelerating user familiar with the system while still guiding those that are less familiar. Then there's aesthetics and minimalist design. So we don't want to overwhelm our users by displaying unnecessary information. We want to keep screens and dialogues focused and minimal to maximize visibility and clarity. Then there's to help users recognize, diagnose, and recover from errors. So again, errors are going to occur, you know, and it's important to say help users to understand what caused the error in plain language and how they can go about rectifying the situation. And then through help and documentation, even though it's best, say, to design away the need for help and documentation, but it's important to make it accessible when it's needed. So don't make users struggle to find help and where it's possible, say, present it contextually as needed in plain, clear language. Now let's examine each one of these individually. So the first principle is about keeping users informed about their actions and what's happening at any given interaction. Now, when users are informed of, say, the current system status, they learn the results of their past interactions so they can better determine what their next steps will be. Remember, when a design is predictable, it builds trust in the product and it allows users to feel more in control. Now, it's important to provide instant feedback that serves to inform the status of the interaction in addition to guiding and leading the user to the next step. So for an example of this, if we think about like when you upload something, you should see the progress. That should be clearly visible to know, that it's actually doing something, that something is actually being uploaded, and what the progress is of the upload. Now, this principle claims that a system should always speak the user's language and follow real-world conventions, rather than system-oriented terms. So basically, it's making the design, the interactions, labeling, and conversation a little bit more familiar to the real world. Now, this means avoiding marketing jargon or other expressions that might be familiar to, say, who is building the product, but not to their actual audience. So use, words, phrases, and concepts, again, that are familiar to your target audience. Also, to establish connection with the real world, components should appear in a logical order that'll make sense to the users according to their life experiences. Remember, people's mental model of technology is based on their offline experiences combined with their prior digital interactions. So, with that in mind, always use icons or other illustrations that resonate with the real world so users instantly recognize and understand, what you're trying to say. Example of this would be like the recycle bin icon is similar to, like, say, a real bin, and the icon itself shows whether it has files in it or whether it doesn't. Now, this principle talks about giving the user the freedom to navigate and perform actions, the freedom to undo, say, any accidental actions. Now, this principle can be best illustrated by, say, Gmail's flash message with undo actions when we accidentally, say, delete an email. Users, often choose system functions by mistake, and they'll need a clearly marked like emergency exit to leave the unwanted state without having to go through like an extended dialogue. You know, um, this means supporting like the undo and the redo. Now, a good UI design should never impose an action on the user or make decisions for them. Instead, the user should only suggest which path the user can take. Now, the interactions you build must give users the freedom to decide and, say, take the action they see fit, except for rules that, say, go against the system or interfere with, like, maybe some kind of functionality or something. Now, however, don't forget to consider that users might regret their decisions or make an error. Therefore, it's going to be necessary to think of how the system can allow users to undo and redo their actions according to their needs. Again, a good example of this would be Google Docs that shows the undo and the redo options. Now, this heuristic is about keeping the same language throughout the system to avoid confusing the user. So when users interact, say, with a product, they should have no doubt about the meaning of a word, icon, or symbols that are being used. Therefore, an interface must follow the system's conventions, maintaining interaction patterns across different contexts. Designers should create a consistent design that speaks the same language and treats similar things in the same way. You will always say find the sign in or the profile details or the shopping cart in the top, right corner. That's that consistency. So consistency is going to be key. A submit button, on one page should look the same across the entire site, on any page that you're on. If we show the data in a particular table format on one page, then it should look the same, the next time the data is being shown in a tabular format. If the header is displayed, say, in a certain way on the public pages, it should be the same way when, say, the user logs in. How many times did your Outlook remind you that there is no attachment in the email when you mentioned that something was attached? So Outlook intuitively scans the email for these type of keywords and then alerts the user before sending them. This is error prevention. So this Nielsen heuristic proposes that a good design should always prevent errors from occurring. Think of a delete file button, for example. We must assume that users might accidentally click on this button, or that they can imagine, say, a different result if they did click on it. So this way, to prevent, say, the user from getting frustrated, say if they deleted a file by mistake, it's essential to create like maybe a warning message to confirm the decision before actually going through with it. So another example of this is when you choose, say, password tips that are provided to prevent errors and password strengths. And this is, calculated and displayed, say, as you type. So, as you type, it tells you, oh, the password is strong or it's weak or whatever the case is, or maybe certain characters are not allowed. It asks you this as you're typing, as opposed to you trying to save this password and then getting the error message, after that. Now, this heuristic aims to reduce users' cognitive load, and this also includes their memory capacity. So it's essential to think of ways to make options and actionable components visible. This is important because it's easier for us to recognize something rather than to remember it. Now, the user should not have to remember all the actions or functions of the system. Therefore, always leave small reminders or information that can assist the users in navigating your design. For example, menu items should be visible or easy to access when needed. Now, other examples of this are like when you Google, it gives you like a list of suggestions as you type, based on, say, your previous searches or maybe related to most searches. It also lists your matches, bookmarks as well. Now, your design should benefit both inexperienced and experienced users. Now, notice that inexperienced users, they need more detailed information, but as they keep using a product, they become experienced users. This way, allowing them to customize processes like creating keyboard shortcuts and things like that is going to be good practice. Also, try enabling personalization by tailoring content and functionality for individual users. So example of this is while a novice user might use the default Google image search, like the one shown here, the expert user can always, say, refine the search, by specifying like maybe a size or a color or a type or so on. So as designers, we don't want to consider aesthetics above functionality. Okay, so therefore, when we create interactions, they should contain only essential information. Avoid unnecessary visual elements that can, say, overwhelm or distract the users. Remember that each piece of information will compete with relevant, indispensable data and could deviate attention from the most essential things that you want your user to see. Dialogues should not contain information which is irrelevant or rarely needed. Every extra unit of information in a dialogue, again, is going to compete with the relevant units of information and it's going to diminish their relative visibility. Google search and account login is an example, a good example of like a minimalist design that only has the required information to perform the primary task. In contrast to, say, Yahoo, if you look at Yahoo search, it's cluttered with so many different irrelevant details. So the thing is, you want to communicate, not decorate. So your design should help the user identify and find solutions to eventual problems and errors. For that, express error messages in plain language, code free and clear. Don't forget to tell them what the problem is and suggest a solution. So, you want to clearly inform the user, that an error has occurred, so you give them like whatever the error message is, and then you tell them what the problem is, and then you offer a way for them to fix the error. So that means, when there's an error, you shouldn't panic the user. You need to help them, recover by suggesting a solution. Um, this error message is going to assure them, that they're safe, and it should suggest maybe some alternative links or something like that. So looking at the screen here, like instead of just, end up at a page that is not found, this kind of funny error messages kind of keeps the audience engaged. And then as you can see, it gives them like different relevant links and things like that. And that kind of keeps them on your site. So, you want to approach, like I say, you want to approach and clearly inform the user, that the error has occurred and give them a way out, suggest a solution. Now, the last step of the Nielsen heuristics concerns documentation that will help users understand how to perform their tasks. Now, even though it's better if the system can be used without this, it may be necessary, say, to provide help and documentation. Any such information, though, should be easy to be searched, focused on the user's tasks, list concrete steps to be carried out, and not be too large. So an example of this is on GoDaddy's help page. While there's a search field, there's also main categories and frequently asked questions on the same page. And finally, what I wanted to show you was an example of a facilitator sheet that you can use to document your findings when you do this kind of testing. Now, in this table, each row represents, say, a specific use case with a description of the problem that was encountered, and then the severity rating of either a high, medium, or low, and then the corresponding heuristic principle that were affected by the issue. So this structure allows you to be able to document and analyze usability problems more systematically, which will enable you to prioritize and then address them effectively during the design and the development process.